Our world is full of pleasures. Our world is full of fun things. Delight means to take great pleasure in, to be a cause or source of great pleasure, to have a high degree of gratification, to give keen enjoyment, to give joy or satisfaction. And you know, we're going to go out after the service this morning, and we're going to have all kinds of games and fun and food and cotton candy and popcorn and whatever. And these are all of the types of things that our kids, our young people especially, I think some of the old people too, some of us old people, we take some pleasure in those things, don't we? It's fun. It's enjoyable. There's a lot of, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of fun with it. There's fun colors. There's fun games. They go to regionals like yesterday, and our young people, they have a lot of fun in these events. And, we go through life. It's full of things, especially as we look at it as adults. There's a lot of things, day after day, that want to draw us towards them because they are pleasurable. And they're not always good things for us. They're not always things that will edify us or build us up. A lot of times they're things that will tear us down, that will take something from us in the end. But we know that all things that are pleasurable in the world, they're not all bad. But the problem is they often distract us from what we are to truly have pleasure in. And that is the Lord himself. If you go back, and I can't even begin to tell you the many, many passages, but if you go back just to even the 10 Commandments, they were talking about that this morning with one of the games. What is the first and greatest commandment? Well, of course it is, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy strength. And when Jesus came back and said to them, when the Pharisees came to Jesus and they said, what is the greatest and best commandment? And what did he say? He repeated that first one. To love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy strength. And with it, what was he saying? And what does that first commandment say to us? Our pleasure, our delight, our greatest joy, our greatest love should be for the Lord. But yet how often do we get distracted? And I love this. It's fishing season. I love fishing. Or it's March Madness season. I love basketball. Or I don't know. I mean, there's not necessarily wrong with any of those things. It's when those things, the love of those things, takes the place of the greater love that we are to have for the Lord himself. And unfortunately, we see this happening in the life of Samson. We see this as an example. Because Samson, while he was born to do something special for the Lord, and he was gifted with these special abilities that no one else had, God had a purpose for him to see. God had a purpose for Samson, didn't he? Even from day one that we just read, the angel came to his mother and said, hey, I've got something special for this son that's going to be born for you. And he's going to take a special vow, and he's going to do something that previous generations and the people that even living in the land right now are not going to be able to do. He's going to be specially gifted for a special purpose. That's why he says in Judges 13 and verse 5, he says, lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come on his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb. Now, we tend to say, well, we all understand what Nazarite is. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But it's delineated for us what a Nazarite was back in the book of Numbers. Someone could take a vow of a Nazarite, and the Nazarite vow was not only just not to cut their hair, but they were to not drink any wine or strong drink. They were not to have anything from the grapevine. And they were never to touch dead bodies, in addition to keeping all the rest of the law that they were told to keep. And they didn't always have to be a Nazarite for all of their lives. Samson was one that was from the day he was born, was told he was to be kept to keep this Nazarite vow. Some of them would say we're keeping it for 30 days or whatever. And it was the Nazarite, the word itself just means somebody who says, I'm going to be separated out for God. I'm going to be set apart for him. I'm going to be somebody who goes the extra mile. I'm going to take this extra vow onto myself as a way to show my dedication or my commitment to the Lord. So from day one, Samson was singled out by the angel before he was born to be singled out, to be set apart, to be dedicated, to be fully committed to serving the Lord all of his life. God had a purpose for him. But you know, God's purposes can only be fulfilled when we yield to God's pattern for us. And this was Samson's first big issue. See, Samson didn't always want to live according to God's pattern. The rules of the Nazirite vow were quickly discarded when they didn't suit Samson, right? We remember the story. He didn't cut his hair, at least not until he got into the trap there with Delilah, right? And got pulled down in that area. So he didn't cut his hair. He kept that part of it. Maybe just because it served his own interest, that he knew that was the source of his strength. I don't know. But nonetheless, he kept some of it, but he didn't keep all of it. We know that there was, of course, the time that he killed the lion. And, of course, the lion came to attack him, and he was in self-defense and whatnot. But then in Judges chapter 14, we see what happened afterwards. In Judges 14 and verses 8 and 9, it says, after a time he returned to take her. This was the woman that he was going after. And he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. Now remember, he wasn't supposed to touch any dead animals or people of any type. And behold, it says, there was a swarm of bees and honey in the carcass of the lion. And he took thereof in his hands and went on eating, and came to his father and mother, and he gave them, and they did eat. But he told them not that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. Samson began to show a blatant disregard for God's plan, for God's pattern, for God's purpose for him. And not only did he decide, I'm going to take this honey out of this, I don't know, that sounds pretty disgusting to me anyway. I mean, I like my honey grown in the honey boxes, that comes out of the, and runs through the purifier, what they do. I don't know how they make it. I wouldn't want to be eating it out of an old dead lion's carcass, but this was this was the case of Samson. And he not only did it for himself, he brought it home and says, hey, Mom and Dad, look what I found on the way home. Forget about where I got it from, or by what means it came to you. This is for you. I brought you a present. Well, wasn't that nice? Sonny brought us home a present. So brought us home some honey. Didn't tell them where it came from. Didn't tell them how he had completely disregarded God's rules in order to get this honey. He disregarded, he would pick and choose when and where he decided that dedication meant something to him. And we also see it with his parents' counsel. And of course, we know Samson didn't just have an issue with dead bodies. He had an issue with women too, didn't he? Samson had a woman problem. And one of the first problems started when he didn't want to listen to his parents' counsel. In Judges 14 and verse 3, it says this, his father and his mother said unto him, is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? See, Samson looked across the fence and said, the grass is greener over there. I think I like the women on the Philistine side of the road, and I don't really care about the women that I'm supposed to be a part of in the nation of Israel. And so he says, why are you going over to the other side? His parents said, don't do that. But what does Samson say in the end of verse 3? He says, get her for me, for she pleaseth me well. She pleaseth me well. So he began to seek out a wife and other women in all of the wrong places. And you know what? He found very quickly that he disregarded God's pattern for his life. He quickly disregarded that. And so God's purpose is diminished in his ability to work through Samson because he didn't yield to God's pattern. But we also see that God can not only fulfill his purpose in us also when we just choose to play around with our lives. Because what do we see with Samson as another example? Not just that he disregarded the pattern, but Samson was kind of one of the first playboys that we see. Samson played around with every part of his life. And he was called from day one, if you remember, he was called to begin to deliver the people of Israel from the oppression that the Philistine people were putting upon the Israelites at the time. This was a strong nation. The Philistines had massive armies, and they had great strength, and the people of Israel were unable to defeat the Philistines in all of these battles. And they had control of, actually, interestingly enough, some of the very same pieces of property that are in dispute right now in the land of Israel. You talk about the Gaza Strip. You ever hear that in the news? Well, this was the stronghold of the Philistines. It was the area of Gaza, and the Gaza Strip was one of the great areas where the Philistines had set up their great cities. And even today, the Israelites clash with those living in the area of Gaza. But that's a side point. The issue is Samson was chosen from the time of his birth to begin to deliver these people from the Philistines. And what does he do? Instead of focusing on the needs of his people, seeing their plight, seeing their oppression from the Philistines, not the Philippines. We can get that one mixed up pretty easily. Instead of doing that, what did he do? Time and time again, we see Samson focusing on his leisure activities. Time and time again, it's what can I do to have some fun in this situation? He began to play around had riddles with people. He had games that he played with people. He led people on. He would make bets with people. And you know who all these people were that he fraternized with? The Philistines. The very people he was called to deliver his own people from. That's the people that he ran around with. Those are the people that he played the games with. In Judges 14:10, of course, we see a couple of examples. Judges 14:10, he went to the Philistines, and it says, Samson made there a feast, for so used the young men to do. He had fun parties. Judges 14:11 says, when they came to pass, when they saw him, they brought him 30 companions to be with him. He had surrounded himself with friends. Now, those 30 companions weren't people of Israel. Those were Philistine companions. He had gotten himself involved in the wrong friends. And then, of course, we look at verse 12 of Judges 14. Samson said unto them, I will now put forth a riddle unto you, if you can certainly declare it me within the 7 days of the feast. 7-day feast? This was some party, right? 7 days of the feast, and find it out, then I will give you 30 sheets and 30 changes of garments. So he gets the big party going, gets the people along, has a big time, 7 days of feasting, and says, well, let's have a little wager. Let's have a little fun, seeking some betting in this. I'll give you a riddle, see if we could find it out. And of course, the riddle was related to this lion that he had killed, and the honey he had gotten out of it. We won't go into that, but the point is this. Time and time again, when you see these glimpses into what Samson was about, he was about having fun. He was about out to make friends with whoever, fraternizing with the enemy, having wages, having bets, having parties, seeking women from the wrong places. This was Samson's desire. This was Samson's delight. This was what he chased after. He had forgotten what the Lord had said in the very first commandment, which was, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. That's the state that a lot of us are in sometimes. We say, why doesn't God fulfill his purpose in us? Why? God's a great God. I'm a Christian. I'm a believer. I understand. I want to serve him. I want to do these great things. Why isn't God working through me? And then maybe if we begin to examine our life, we say, well, where's my heart really at? Where's my delight in? What do I really take my pleasure in? Because you can't say that you really love the Lord and continue to live for yourself. You just can't do both things. Because if you love him, you will seek to live for him and stay focused on what he's called you to do. That's one of the keys to commitment. It's got to start in our hearts. And our actions reveal what our hearts really are. If we say, I'd rather be out, you ever see the guys with the bumper stickers? I'd rather be, and then they feel whatever it is they'd rather be doing. Unfortunately, I think a lot of times we have those bumper stickers in our Bibles. We have those bumper stickers on our prayer closets. We have those bumper stickers when the services are called to come together, or we have needs here. We say, well, I'd rather be out doing this or that. We take more pleasure in the things that we're playing around at than the things that the Lord would have for us. And as a result, we see a lack of God's purpose being fulfilled, and we don't understand. Well, we see not only about God's purpose in Samson, we obviously, one of the very first things we know about Samson is that we see God had his power in him. God has his power in him, and he gave it to him as a surety. Judges chapter 13 and verse 25 says this, the Spirit of the Lord began to move him at times in the camp of Dan between Zorah and Eshtaol. There's one thing that Samson will always be known for, his massive strength, his supernatural strength. But, we don't always see Samson using that strength for the right things, do we? In fact, if you really studied Samson, just a few chapters here in Judges, I think you'll find pretty quickly that Samson was one of these guys that kind of he wreaked havoc wherever he went. It seemed like he was always tearing something up. It seemed like he was always using that great strength and that ability that he had for things that were just personal vendettas, personal vengeance against people. And, I think this is where he went off because, we know that Samson's strength was supernatural. It was a strength that God had invested in him and had placed in him. It was a special ability. And when God gives somebody a special power, a special ability of some type, he expects it to be used to accomplish his plans. But Samson didn't always do that. Samson used God's power, his great strength, to pay back a debt that he lost. Judges 14:19, he lost the wager that he gave to the 30 men. And what did he do? He lost the wager that he shouldn't have been making in the first place with people that he shouldn't have been fraternizing with in the first place. And so what does he do? He uses this great supernatural ability of his strength. In verse 19 of Judges 14, it says, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. He went down to Ashkelon, which was one of the cities of the Philistines. He slew 30 men of them, took their spoil, gave change of garments unto them which expounded the riddle, and his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. So he just went down and indiscriminately killed 30 men to steal their belongings, to give to the people that he had promised he would pay for this riddle that they solved. Samson used God's power to pay back a personal debt. Samson also used God's power for personal vengeance. We always think of Samson and Delilah, but Samson was at least with 4 different women that we know of in the book of Judges. And the first was this woman from Timnath. And after he lost this bet, these friends of his took the wife that he had and said, we're going to give her to somebody else. They took his wife from him, and he wasn't happy. In Judges 15, we see how he reacted. It says in verses 4 and 5, Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took firebrands and turned tail to tail, put a firebrand in the midst between 2 tails. And when he had set the brands on fire, he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines and burn up both the shocks and also the standing corn with the vineyards and the olives. Well, if Samson didn't have anything, he had an imaginative way of taking care of the people that were against him, didn't he? I don't know how he thought up this one, but nonetheless, he set fire to all of the Philistines' fields and all their crops. He burned up their vineyards. He did that as retaliation for what they had done to him. He had gotten into this tit-for-tat type of war. Personal vengeance, and he used God's power. He used his own personal vengeance again when he slaughtered the men who eventually, in retaliation for that, they burned the father and his wife. They burned them alive. And as retribution for that, he went and he killed a bunch of them. Eventually, after all that happened, he went to Gaza, went in to find a prostitute, and in the middle of getting caught in that whole situation, he decides, I have to escape, uses his great power to, remember when he took the gates off of the city wall, carried them off and threw them? That was because he had gotten himself caught with a prostitute in Gaza. Personal vengeance again. Personal escape, using God's power in ways that weren't designed to be meant for those things. And then, of course, he used his God-given ability to taunt Delilah, who would, time after time say, how did you get so strong, Samson, right? You remember these from Sunday school. And time after time, bind me with cords, or tie my hair down, or do this, or do that. And every time it would be a way he would wake up and he would be free from those things. He would use his great strength as a means to taunt her. So in all these things, we don't see examples of Samson using God's power to accomplish God's plans. No, we see God's power being wasted on personal vendettas and on things that were really driven by anger and greed and personal ambition. God had his power in him as a surety, and Samson blew it. God's power should also not be used to further our own potential in life. Samson was ultimately, he used God's power to make a name for himself. When you say the word Samson, here it is 3,000 years later, immediately we know. Samson, strong guy, long hair. Some people, that's all they know about him. Samson accomplished making a great name for himself through God's power. But did he really ever accomplish what God's potential was for him? Did he ever really do the great things that he could have done to liberate the people of Israel, his own chosen people, in a way that would have been in a greater use of his ability? Wouldn't it have been better if we didn't know Samson today, but yet he was faithful to the Lord, and he had used that power time and time again to eradicate the Philistines through the time that he was there as one of their judges? I don't know. God's power should not be used to further our own potential in life. Maybe, like us, he forgot where his strength really came from. He forgot that it wasn't just from his hair, but it was from the Lord. Because, God gifts us with things too. God gives us abilities. He gives us talents. He gives us strength each morning to get up and face the day. Maybe sometimes that's all we get. Sometimes that's all we need to be able to even function. God gives us new mercies every day. He says his mercies are new every morning. And you know what? How often do we take those talents, do we take our abilities, do we take our education, and whatever strength and a power that we have, the time, the talents, and the treasure, and we waste them on things that aren't what God would have us to do? This was where Samson was at. He used all those things, those resources that God had put into his life, had built into him, and he said, I'm just going to blow them on what makes me happy. Samson's delight was not in the Lord. He delighted in things around him. And as a result, the power that was given him as a surety of God's work and power in his life was wasted. And his own potential was never fulfilled. So God had his purpose for Samson. God had his power in Samson. And God had a people for Samson to serve. God had a people for Samson to serve. You see, even from day one, again, God had called Samson to serve God's people. He didn't expect people to be used to serve Samson. See, Samson kind of got it reversed, didn't he? Samson was built and dedicated from birth to be a servant to God's people. But instead, what did he do? He used people to serve him. People were just pawns in Samson's journey through life. He looked at women, he looked at Philistines, he had no regard for people. He had no regard, certainly, for the people that he was supposed to be serving. He hardly spent any time with them. He was always over with the Philistines. Time and time again, instead of serving the people, he was using the people. We see in Judges 14, verses 1 through 3, it says Samson went down to Timnath. This was the first of the women that we have recorded that he saw and liked. Went down to Timnath. This was, again, a village of the Philistines. Saw a woman in Timnath, of the daughter of the Philistines. He came up and told his father and his mother and said, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughter of the Philistines. Now, therefore, get her for me to wife. Then his father and his mother said unto him, Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she pleaseth me well. He didn't care what his parents thought. He didn't care what the woman thought. He saw something that he liked, and he wanted it for himself. He wanted a person to be used. We see this time and time again. She pleased him well. Verse 7 of Judges 14, he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. All about my personal gain. How can I use these people? He went to the harlot at Gaza. We've talked about that. Judges 16 and verse 4, it says, It came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah, the one that we know so infamously now. Time and time again, well, I'm done with that person. I'm going to go use the next person. I'm going to go to the next person, use them. We see people were just things to Samson. Time and time again, he just used them for his own pleasure, to serve his own lusts. So Samson was supposed to be serving the people, not using them. And Samson was also to be identified as a part of his people instead of standing apart from them. You know, when you think of the life of Samson and who he was, we don't think of him as integrated real well into Jewish society, do we? We don't see him as, these are my people. I identify with the people of Israel, and these are who I care about. No, time and time again, we see Samson standing out and saying, I'm my own person. I'm an independent. No one's going to tell me what to do. Philistines can't stop me. My parents don't matter. The people that are in my life, I'm going to use for my benefit. I'm going to use my strength. I've got my ability. What else do I need? I'm a self-made man. Now, none of us stand with the power of Samson today, but some of us foolishly think or say those same words to ourselves. In fact, we've turned that into an American ideal, haven't we? Be a self-made man, a self-made person. This is one of our great ideals. And there is a certain point where we are to have pride in our work and work hard and do our best and those types of things. But this takes it to the point where you're saying, I am independent. I am set apart. I don't need these other things. How many people say, I hear it all the time. And I know I'm preaching to the choir this morning. They say, I don't need church. I hear this all the time. I've got my Bible, or I can pray to the Lord wherever I'm at, or I'm in this and I'm in that. I'm independent. I don't need to be part of some church. I don't need to be doing that. God's established a church for us to have a support. We are to identify with other believers, other people who want to study God's Word. We're not to try to stand apart. You know what happens with the wildebeest? You ever watch the old documentaries with the lion and the wildebeest? The lion doesn't attack the pack of wildebeest, right? You see him skulking there in the weeds. And what is he doing? He's waiting for that one wildebeest. I don't know why he's always tracking wildebeest, but they are. He's waiting for that one wildebeest to get away from the pack, right? Maybe he's not running as fast, or maybe he gets distracted with, a nice blade of grass over here or something like that. And the next thing you know, you see the lion skulking through the weeds, eyeing that one wildebeest up who's not part of the pack. And I think it's such an apropos visual example of exactly who Satan is in our life. If we're a group of Christians, we are to stay with the group. Because the Bible says Satan is like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And he will do what he can to separate you from the pack, to say, I can do it myself. I don't need to be with everybody else. I don't need this fellowship. I don't need all that stuff. And we get all kinds of excuses. And some of them are right, because you know what? There is no perfect church. And if you find one, don't join it, because you'll ruin it. But the fact of the matter is, we know that there's no perfect church, because we're all imperfect people. But God still has chosen in His Word to set us up together, to be an encouragement to each other, to edify, to teach, and to train, so that we can be together as a pack, so that we can identify as part of the people of God. This was not where Samson was at. He wasn't a part of his people. He wanted to stand apart from them. He may not have ever rejected his people verbally, but his actions certainly distanced himself from them. He was always hanging out with the other crowd, with the enemy. He was very comfortable, time and time again, in the enemy's camp. But he had always seemed to keep himself from identifying fully with the people of God. And eventually, we know what happened to Samson too. The enemy got the best of him. Delilah eventually made him confess. She cut his hair. The Philistines came and bound him. His strength was gone. They put out both of his eyes so he would be blinded. And for the rest of his days, he would spend grinding, turning the grindstone in the Philistines' mill. And he was doomed to that fate until they decided to take him out one day and make fun of him. In one of these great Philistine festive events to honor one of their own gods. And of course, we know in the story, eventually, Samson turned his heart at the last moment and said to the Lord, "Give me strength one more time, and I will use it in whatever I can to defeat these Philistines." And of course, the Bible records that when he pushed those pillars apart and the amphitheater fell on the group of Philistines, it says there were more Philistines killed in Samson's death than in all of his life. Oh, to be not been given that fate. The Philistines were to be defeated through Samson's life, not through his death. But yet, it wasn't until the 11th hour that he decided to turn his heart back to the Lord. Recognize the Lord was the source of his strength, and recognize that the Lord was where his delight should have been all along. And I don't know what really happened in Samson's heart, but we know for whatever reason, God saw fit to give Samson that one more second chance. And so I don't know where we're at this morning. Maybe we've been caught up with the pleasures of life. Maybe the Lord hasn't been always the number one delight in our heart. And just like Samson, God's going to keep coming back and saying, "Hey, you ready to put your delight in me? Do you want to put your pleasure in me?" Let's not get to the end of our life, not wait till Satan has completely humiliated and defeated us in our Christian walk before we decide we're going to turn back to him. He wants us to take pleasure in him. That's why the psalmist in Psalm 37:4 says this, "Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. We want what's best. We want something that will really give us joy, that will really make us happy, that will really find fulfillment in. Don't chase after those things. Chase after the Lord. And we will find fulfillment in Him. We will find joy in Him. We will find that that delight that we've placed in Him will be rewarded within our own souls, within our own lives.